Deel
Morning, Reverend Belfast.
Recordia August Boyle Road. Welcome to be my guest with me, Mary Honan, on Lear Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary, Clare's Wish Foundation in Limerick, and Deel Animal Rescue in West Limerick. And my fabulous guest today is all the way from Belfast, as they say up there, and it's Father Paddy McCafferty, a great Irish name, Father.
Yeah, a good name. Donegal, a lot of Donegal people and Derry people are McCafferty. Sure, if I have any roots up there, I'm always been my family around here, in North Belfast mostly,
Yeah. How did you and you work actually in Belfast itself?
I'm the parish priest of Corpus Christi in West Belfast, which would be an area known as Ballymurphy. If you've heard of Ballymurphy, it's in the news at the moment on account of the Ballymurphy massacre, 9th of August to the 11th of August 1971, and we're awaiting in the next few days the publication of the findings of the inquests into the deaths of 11 of our parishioners, including a priest, that awful few days 50 years ago this summer. 50 years ago.
It's still going on. It's still ongoing.
Well, the grief is unresolved. At the time, the people who were shot dead, including Father Mullen, were described as terrorists, gunmen and gunwomen. Including Father Mullen, he was described as a gunman. And they claimed that there was residue of guns and all this sort of stuff, which was all lies. And families, not only were they having lost a son, a husband, a father, a mother, but their loved ones were vilified in death. And we're hoping and very hopeful that the findings of the inquest will vindicate them, as they have campaigned for truth and justice for 50 years now.
Do you think that there will be any? Do you think there can be any? I'm always interested in that, because I did my doctorate on childhood under Nazism. I'm looking at your lovely menorah behind.
Oh yeah.
Behind you there. It's funny how we all have those as well in Christian homes. It's strange that
yes,
well,
it's our roots, isn't it?
It's our roots, yeah.
And
to have the people wonder why somebody, a Christian, would have the menorah in their home, but it is our roots, and
it's our roots.
And but I often wonder, when we use this word reconciliation and coming to terms with somebody's death, when you go back to the South African the situation under apartheid, and you have people saying, during the Peace and Reconciliation Conference, that only those who are dead can forgive, and they're no longer living. So how can the living forgive for those who have suffered and died? Do you think that it's only, can there ever be reconciliation or peace for people?
I from the families that I'm dealing with here, affected by this horrendous trauma, they're very dignified, and they are, yes, they have been deeply hurt and they're angry, but there's no bitterness among them. They're not full of hatred. And grandchildren and great grandchildren are affected now. It's generational. This is 50 years ago. Many of people immediately affected back then have died, but their relatives, their grandchildren are here, their great grandchildren are here, awaiting this justice for their loved ones who were brutally killed, executed in some cases.
For people who don't know about, who are looking in here, many of the viewers, or most of the viewers, are from outside of Ireland. Could you explain briefly what happened that awful day?
This was the beginning of internment in summer of 1971. On the 9th of August, the British government imposed internment in an attempt to deal with the IRA, who were emerging at that stage and who were attacking the British Army. It was all part of the Troubles here, that we call the Troubles, which goes way back in history to Britain's invasion of Ireland and so on. And then the partition of Ireland 100 years ago this year. This is the centenary, and the fact that you have in the north of Ireland, in the 6 counties, you have a sizable part of the population Catholic, and even more the majority Protestant, although that is decreasing as time goes on, that they're getting closer and closer. But the Protestants identify with Britain, and the Catholics mostly identify with the 26 counties and regard themselves as Irish as much as anybody from Cork. And the Protestants would say they're as British as anybody from London, So you have a clash of identities, and it's all been difficult for all sorts of reasons. But in 1969, there began what we call the Troubles. The modern day Troubles. Have been troubles in the past here before, but this was the most recent outbreak of violence by those who wanted reunification of Ireland and those who wanted to stay part of the United Kingdom. And the Catholic community, the IRA, and it's mostly political, really, rather than religious, But the British government, in an attempt to deal with the IRA, to clamp down on them, introduced internment. And basically there were dawn raids, swooping in. People were dragged out of their homes early in the morning or the middle of the night, and taken into internment camps, those who they were suspicious of. Needless to say, most of those they interned were innocent people who had nothing to do with the IRA. They didn't get the IRA men, they got innocent people. But trouble, naturally, in an atmosphere like that, trouble erupted. People were rioting and so on, and people were afraid, and people went out to look for loved ones. All of those, or most of all of the people, the 11 people that were shot dead on that over those 3 days, were out trying to help. Were out looking for Mrs. Connolly, for example, was looking for some of her children to bring them to safety. This all happened, erupted, and almost. And there were the Protestants were firing shots and so on, and the British Army then returned fire, and innocent people were shot dead. And this was over those 3 days, August 9th, 10th, and 11th, 1971. All of those who were shot dead were ordinary people going about their business. A couple of them were young people who were out curiosity. Young people are curious, and they go out to look to see what's happening, and they were in the wrong place at the wrong time in a few cases. But most of them were, all of them, not most of them, all of them were shot down ruthlessly by the British Parachute Regiment. And at the time, as I said, even Father Mullen, a local priest who was out anointing the dying, giving a man the last rites, and he was shot dead. And a young lad went to help him. A young 19-year-old lad was shot dead going to help Father Mullen. So it was horrendous. It was slaughter. And the British Army ran amok, basically. And they went on a killing spree. And there was never justice. We're realistic, the British Army really have never been held to account for what they've done here. But we're hoping that the inquests will declare that these were innocent people who were unlawfully killed, that there was no excuse to kill them. They weren't terrorists.
In some respects, Father, that is a double-edged sword. Because, when you hear the phrase, they were innocent people killed, I don't know how much comfort that gives people.
No, it doesn't bring them back. But what it will do is it will redress the balance. Historically, at the time, in the newspapers, in the media, their loved ones who were described as terrorists. Even the priest was described as a terrorist, And it was a slur and a slander.
And I can understand, my family have been in the Irish Army. My first cousins have been in the British Army. My dad did his national service. My uncles did with the Royal Army Medical Corps. So I understand young soldiers go where they're sent, sent to, and I'm English born, and my father was. So, I understand when you join an army and the army sends you to these countries and you don't have a choice in many respects. Sometimes volunteer to go. But you think you're young and you think it's an exciting time and we're going to go to Ireland and we're going to be A, B, C, and D, and then they're faced, and then they become trigger, and then you have some trigger happy, and others who are just ruthless, and some and some who for whom it affects them the remainder of their lives, on both sides. But I don't know how much I could forgive a soldier for killing my family member, and hearing the word when they weren't terrorists.
It's not so much about that. That's another day's work, forgiveness and all. That's another conversation. This is about vindication of people's reputations, that they weren't terrorists. They were ordinary people. They were not involved in the IRA or anything. Father Mullen was a priest going about his pastoral duties who was shot dead, carrying out those duties. So it's purely, this is about the vindication and the search for justice and truth for 50 long years of grief and loss and the injustice of it and all of the trauma of it that has not ended.
Why has it taken the powers that be so long to actually come out and be honest and say this was either a mistake, a trigger happy soldier, somebody who just panicked? Well, you know, soldiers wouldn't you?
This regiment.
I panicked. I shot that man by accident.
This regiment went on then the following January to carry out the Bloody Sunday killings. The same regiment. So there was no accountability. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you're dealing with a government. You're dealing with military. And they're very slow to admit anything that they did was wrong. You know, that's reality. We have to live with that. But that does not, the people here decided that they were not accepting that. And they were not going to allow their loved ones to be vilified. I mean, the family of young Frank Quinn, for example, 19-year-old man who was 2 years married. He had a little child of 2 and he had a little baby on the way. And his family lived over in South Belfast in a mainly Protestant area. And they had to leave their home because their neighbours believed that their son was in the IRA, was a terrorist. And their neighbours turned against them. And some didn't. Now, some were good people who wanted them to stay, but it wasn't safe for them to stay and they had to leave. Not only had they lost their son, but they were thrown into the chaos of having no home, you know, and they had to look for another house and all of that. And grieving for a young man, you know, a mother and a father, a young wife, grieving brothers and sisters for this young man, you know, and that's the reality of it. And we're not, you know, there's no magic wand. There is no magic.
Stained, reputations unjustifiably stained by
exactly
being a terrorist.
Yes, for the convenience of covering up an atrocity, what was simply an atrocity, you know, but to justify it, these were terrorists, and to try and play down the horror of what they did and what the state is responsible for ultimately, you know. The government is ultimately responsible for what the actions those soldiers are individually. They will answer, and they may not answer in this life, but we know that they will answer for it when they pass over into the next world. But you know, there has to be some taking of responsibility for 50 years of grief and trauma and suffering for innocent people.
And well, you know, I mean, there's nothing eats into a person more than injustice, and I suppose people can come to terms with the loss of a loved one, but what they can't come to terms with is loss, and compounded by the stain of. And I mean, let's face it: one man's terrorist or one man's freedom is another man's freedom.
All that,
That's another subject entirely. But we've only to look at our own history and Padraig Pearse and the like. To us, there. Anyone who was brought up in Ireland, they were people who fought for 600 years of occupation.
Yes, exactly, and it's all to do with that, you know. It's all the baggage of history, you know, and everything.
It never goes away, and
no.
But do you think that if there was a referendum in the morning, Father, I never thought we were going to be going down this route, but my interviews tend to kind of go like that. I follow
Yes, sure.
the
Yeah.
way the conversation's
Mhm.
going.
Mhm.
But do you think that if there was a referendum, a border referendum in the morning to decide whether to be part of the South or to be part of the North, we should have the numbers now in the North. When I say we,
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
in the but I would imagine there's quite a sizable amount of Catholics in the North who would still want to remain part of
Well,
the.
it's a question. I don't know the answer really to the question. All I can say personally, when I look at the 26 counties and what it has become and how the direction that they've gone, do I want to be part of that? They fill me with dread. The thoughts of you united, and they're not much better up here. We have, at least in the South, there was a referendum that chose the killing of unborn children. Here in the North, it was imposed upon us, and with the collusion and the real direct pleading of Sinn Féin and the SDLP and the Alliance Party, they called upon Westminster without consultation with the electorate here to impose abortion on the 6 counties, which we now have, And do I want to be part of the South now? I don't know. I was all my life a nationalist and believed that the United Ireland was the best thing for our country and every part of it. I don't know anymore. When I look at the South, when I look at that government, at how they have treated the churches with the lockdown, their attitude in criminalising the Mass and the sacraments, and they're not even allowed to hear a person's confession outside.
We're getting onto a subject that I want to actually get onto in a minute. Sure. It's not just, I suppose, the masks, but the Gardaí going into a Catholic church walk. So I suppose, since we've touched on that subject, how much support do you think that the hierarchy in the Catholic Church, and not even the hierarchy in the Catholic Church, but in Protestant churches and all religious communities, are giving their own parishioners and giving their, but we'll stick with the Catholic Church because both you and I suppose, are from the Catholic faith. My father's people were Protestants, Methodist, Welsh Methodist. Yes. Mm-hmm. He became a very strong Catholic when he married my mother. But I suppose when you look at what happened there recently with the priests going in, and I'm thinking there was 5, if not 6, 80-year-olds inside in the church, and two 90-year-olds. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Instead of just standing at the back of the church, they walked to the top. Not just that, not one of them genuflected in front of the tabernacle. They showed no reverence. They marched across the altar, brought the priest out, find a priest, and I was speaking to Father Iggy there last a couple of days ago, and Father Iggy was saying that you have to follow the orders from the government and that. As Catholics, it's all right having Mass online and hearing Mass online, but part of the Mass, and the fundamental part of the Mass, is receiving communion, being able to receive the sacraments of confession, Holy Communion, First Holy Communion, confirmation. All of those are denied us at present. Now, I think that we are, as priests and that, I think they'd be well capable of separating people out inside in the church. My cathedral, my parish church, holds over 1,000. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I saw a funeral the other day with the door closed and the people standing outside in the lashing rain while the coffin was outside the door. Yes. I mean, what are the hierarchy doing? The GA seem to be able to get their matches on.
I know.
And the bishops get...
I think that they're in a difficult position. They're trying to do the right thing. Obviously, there is a danger with people gathering, but it's proportionality, whatever. And it is the high-handed, heavy-handed attitude of the state is it justifiable? I mean, they've literally outlawed the Mass. And you're absolutely right, because online Mass is very, very much second best. It's not even second best, it's about sixth best. It's
not Mass.
The Mass is we're meant to be at Mass and participating in it, and we can't receive Holy Communion via a webcam, you know? You can only receive Holy Communion by being actually present at Mass. And where the nature of the Mass is gathering. It's much more than that, of course, but we need to be there. Being online is not ideal, and it's not, we should never settle for that. But we were in an emergency situation with a pandemic, of course. We were trying to keep people safe and protect people. I think the bishops were doing their very best to protect people. But there comes a point when, you know, you've attitudes of the which just comes across, I have to be very blunt. The state in the 26 counties come across now as anti-religion and anti-Catholic. That's
what it's coming across to me, and I have to be very, very frank, because
they would keep the churches permanently closed if they could, but they won't be able to do that.
The logic, Father, of being able to play a match or have a rugby tournament between counties and rugby players, and playing between all counties, and soccer back, albeit there's no supporters there, or tennis matches you watch, all of it's back. Every country, we have the longest lockdown in Europe.
Yes, and the most draconian attitude to religion in
people
Europe.
Continuously on flights, instead of blocking the border between North and South for 6 months, and stopping all flights from coming in and ferries from coming in.
Well, they should have taken an all Ireland approach. They should have sealed the airports off, the whole island. We're an island. We could have easily taken an all island approach, but they didn't. I mean, they bungled at so many levels, both North and South governments.
There's no reason
why jurisdictions.
We should be completely COVID free now, because, as you say, we are an island.
Yeah, we're an island.
We're not connected by, like London is connected to Paris through the
tunnel.
And Europe is all connected to each other. We're out in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes.
There's no reason why we couldn't have taken that all Ireland approach.
Yes, exactly. But they didn't. And both jurisdictions, here in the north, the Unionists looking to see what London was going to do. London, I don't think, knew what it was doing half the time. And then the government in the 26 counties, you know, they all of them, they bungled at different directions, and we've paid the price. But, you know, I think the time has come, and thank God, though, having said all that I said there, the churches are reopening now in the 26 counties. We're reopened since Palm Sunday. We were able to have Holy Week, the liturgies of Holy Week. People in this 26 counties couldn't. It was ridiculous, you know. And I believe it was vindictive. It was vindictive on the part of the government. It was they showed vindictiveness towards faith communities.
Well, I think, you know, I mean, I can't argue there, because, I mean, I'll be honest, that is, you know, I feel that there's a certain level of vindictiveness, because when you look at the case there recently, I'm making no judgment about what was going on, because it looks like it could possibly be a family issue. But the man that videoed in Roscommon, he videoed the party just marching in, and I mean, absolutely no reverence. If you weren't even a believer, you'd show some level of respect in somebody else's place of worship. And they, you know, you could say they were doing a job, but their job at any level, you'd respect. As I say, I come from a multi-religious family.
Yes.
I would never walk into a Methodist or a Pentecostal church, or into, my friends are Muslim. I would never walk into a mosque and show that.
No, you wouldn't.
Or into a synagogue and show, because my research was all on Judaism. And show some level of respect. I mean, now you can have, 50 people at a wedding. There was about 6 people inside in this church.
Yeah, it was definitely totally over the top, completely over the top, you know, and no sensitivity. I mean, basic decency, as you've said, you know, there was no basic decency shown even to those people who were not threatening anybody. You know, we can have our masses now with our safe number in our churches, and you know, there's been no, and our thanks be to God in our parish here. We've had no outbreaks. The church has been safe and sanitized, and everyone plays their part. Everyone is wearing masks and keeping their distance. We're doing everything that we are asked and required to do. And how it can be different for our brothers and sisters across the border is beggars belief, you know.
Well, you know, I mean, my cathedral, St. John's Cathedral in Limerick, it is the cathedral in the city. It holds, as I say, 1,000.
Yes,
and
yes.
People had actually gone into that church. The Gardaí could potentially have gone in. I've seen funerals down there recently, and the Gardaí all around the funeral, and everyone standing on the street. There's our Jesuit church up in O'Connell Avenue. There's new priests, relatively priests. It's run by an order, a French order, and they're all young. And they're Tridentine, and they were out on the street. They had, and people were standing at O'Connell Monument, all at socially distant. And a local councillor here in Limerick, I mean, it's gone all over Facebook. She rang the Gardaí. She was reporting them. Somebody else living in an apartment across the way started going over with these. With loud music to annoy them, because she said, how dare they celebrate mass. I mean, it's turning,
well, that's vindictiveness.
It's
that's
turning
vindictiveness
against
your
neighbor.
That's vindictiveness. Yeah, pure and simple. You know, those people are hostile to religion, and they would keep churches closed forever if they could. But they won't be able to do that. You know, that's not what it has been tried in Ireland for 300 years to stamp out the Catholic faith, and it didn't work, and it will not work now either today. It won't work.
You know, you're talking about peace in the north, or peace, and that. I attended an event a few years ago up in Belfast, and it was the Global Peace Foundation event, and we went to see the peace walls, and we went to this particular area where, you know, still it was Protestant, directly opposite Catholic. And we were there, and one of the she was from the Netherlands. She was a professor from the Netherlands. She said, there's no peace. How can you say that there's peace here, she was saying, when you have this community completely gated in, and directly opposite, and they were a Protestant community that had a big double gate, and directly opposite the double gate was a house, and the entire front of the house windows were all bricked up, completely bricked up. And you were saying the house must have been pitch dark because there was only light from one side of the house. And we were told that was a Catholic house. That was a Catholic community there. And I was thinking, how delicate and fragile is the peace there?
Well, yes, I mean,
is it waiting
it is fragile. We've seen in the last number of weeks back to rioting in the streets over this so-called protocol, which, you know, these young people are being whipped up into a frenzy. But I have to say, we're nowhere near as bad as we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Thank God. We're not at that. We've definitely progressed. We're talking about generations of injustice and hurt. And it will take a number of generations, I think, for our society to be safe enough that there will be no walls and no barriers anymore. But we're not there yet. But we're getting there, and our society is a lot safer. When I was growing up, when I went to school, I was sometimes not sure if I would get home until maybe late at night because of bomb scares, because of actual bombs. You could be stopped by soldiers as a child and your school bag emptied out onto the street in front of you. You could be harassed. You were turning on the radio every morning and you were hearing of someone had been murdered, shot dead, or whatever. This was ongoing, constant. We don't, thank God, live in that situation now, but we still have a way to go. There's no question about that.
I mean, there's a very good organisation in the north called Cooperation Ireland.
Yeah. Yes.
I know Dr. Ellen Largy and Barry Fennell, and both of them come from both sides of the divided community. Dr. Ellen Largy is Protestant and Barry Fennell Catholic, and they're great friends, and they do some great work to try and bring about peace and you would hope that.
Oh yes, there's lots of reasons for hope, and we're not where we were, and it's due to on the ground people like you've mentioned, and other people quietly working away, building bridges, reconciling, getting people to know each other, and so that it's happening, and it has been happening for quite some time. And it was even happening when things were bleak, when things were really bleak. And thanks be to God, our society did suffer greatly, but it did not actually go over the edge that other countries did go over. I'm thinking, for example, of the Balkan Wars and things like that. We never got to that point of utter mayhem. Yes, life was badly disrupted quite often, and we did have terrible atrocities, and we had murder almost on a daily basis, but we didn't yet reach that level of ferocity that other countries reached,
Can you see if there was, as I say, back to that border poll, if there was a border poll in the morning, do you think it's too soon now? I mean, I know you have reservations and not unjustifiable reservations about being part of a 32 county Ireland. But what would it entail, do you think, to get a 32 county Ireland?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't see myself as having any expertise on that. I have less and less interest in it. I don't know what way I would vote, to be honest with you. And I think I don't know. I mean, it's too close to call, I think, still, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I don't preoccupy myself with that. I have enough to be preoccupied with rather than worrying or thinking about a 32 county Ireland. The one thing I would say, did I ever think I would see the day in thinking about a 32 county Ireland, that such an Ireland would be a cold house for Catholics. And I mean faithful Catholics, Catholics who believe in their faith, not cultural Catholics, who take the label and so on, whatever. I'm talking about faithful Catholics who believe what the church teaches, and that this modern Ireland, whatever it is, would be a cold house for such people. And that if you don't promote or support certain ideological positions, you're seen as the enemy.
But you're also seen as right wing. People like
right wing. Yeah.
People like to label people, and
yes.
Instead of, I mean, what is wrong with believing what you were brought up to believe?
These labels, as regards the faith, these labels of right and left have no place. There are two types of Catholic. There are faithful Catholics and there are bad Catholics. I didn't say good Catholics, I said faithful Catholics, because we strive to be faithful, but we fail, and we need the sacrament of reconciliation regularly. And that's why the Lord gave it to us. But then you have bad Catholics. I remember reading about St. Bernadette, the Lourdes visionary, Bernadette Subiru, and she was asked, she was in the convent in Nover. This was a number of years after the Lourdes apparitions. And Bernadette was a sister in the convent of Nover. And the Prussians were about to invade France. They were at the gates, as it were. And they asked Bernadette, St. Bernadette, are you afraid of the Prussians? And she replied, I only fear bad Catholics. That's what she said, that I only fear them. And what I mean by bad Catholics, I'm talking about those who adopt the label, but everything they do is contrary to the faith.
I mean, the way I believe in it, and I believe in it for every person of faith, whatever their faith belief is that they were brought up in. If you don't believe in something, you'll fall for everything.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. You have to, it's like you have to have something, I think, and whether that's to believe even in a secular society as opposed to a religious society. Believe that, profoundly believe in that.
Yeah.
But because, you have to have a belief. When I interview lots of people now who are victims of all sorts of genocide. And the one thing that has come out, irrespective of their religious beliefs or their ethos, is hope. And if you have hope or belief in something, if I believe life is going to be better. Things are going to get better. That's what got many of them through suffering that they had. Not money, not anything other than the fact that life was going to be better. I mean, if you look at Anne Frank as an example, Anne Frank fundamentally believed that the world was good and that there were good people out there and that life was going to be good and she was going to be, and it was the only thing that gets you through. And knocking people of faith for being having faith is like saying to them, stop breathing, stop drinking water. It's what keeps them going. And if that keeps you going, if faith is the only thing and religion is the only thing and the belief in a church is the only thing that gets you from A to B, what harm is it?
Yes, the early Christians who were being persecuted said, without the Eucharist, we cannot live. So that we were willing to risk their lives. They risked their lives by gathering for the Eucharist. They could be found and exposed and killed and so on. But they said, we'll take the risk because we can't live without the Eucharist. The government in the 26 counties is treating religion and faith as if it were like a hobby or some sort of a pastime that you can do without. We cannot do without our faith. It's integral to who we are. As you say, it's like breathing. You can't stop breathing.
It's been defined, Father, as non-essential because all the essential occupations and essential jobs have been open. But anything that was non-essential, like hairdressers, which you could argue somebody getting their hair done can be psychologically good for them. But churches weren't open.
Well, this is an example of what we're seeing. This bias, vindictive bias, is the only explanation I can see for that, and ignorance, pure ignorance, and a refusal to even consider. I mean, it's unreasonable at this stage. Okay, we're with the pandemic this time last year was at its height, and we've had different waves, and we've done our utmost, and rightly so, because we have to protect each other and we have to protect those who are vulnerable, and many of our people in our congregations are vulnerable, elderly, and so on. And we're doing that, and we have done that, but we're not at the stage that we were last summer or last winter, that just passed. We're further on, and I don't see any justification for the heavy-handed attitude, draconian approach of the Southern government to religion and churches and faith. I think it's biased, and it's vindictive.
The latest now is that you can have 50 at a wedding, but 15 and 5, 21 can only go to the reception, and of the 21, only 6 can be inside. So how do you, as a husband and wife, tell Auntie so-and-so you have to stay out in the rain?
It's nonsensical.
You sit outside while Auntie so-and-so goes indoors.
I don't
know
this is what we're dealing with, it's what we're dealing with. It's nonsensical.
It's just not making any sense at all. It's not. But how did you become a priest, Father?
Well, I always,
from
I was no age, I was fascinated with the church and with going to mass. I loved going to mass as a child. I would have gone to every mass in the parish church if I had been allowed to. And I decided pretty young that I would like to be a priest. I remember saying it as a child, and my father and mother thought, he's a child, he'll grow out of that, and all that. But I didn't grow out of it. And it got stronger as I got older, became a teenager, and became involved in the church from a young age as an altar server. And then I, very, very uneventful, I entered the seminary at 18 and went through studies and so on, and was ordained. I'll be 32 years ordained this June, next month. And, but I mean, having said that, I mean, as I said, it was straightforward in one way it was, but in another way it wasn't, because as a child I was a victim of abuse. It's in the public domain. I was abused by a babysitter when I was a little child of about 4. And then I was abused by a priest when I was a young student for the priesthood.
Wow.
And that had a terrible effect upon me and my life. And, the priest who abused me, it was terrible. And I was already in the process of studying for the priesthood. I was in the early stages of that. I looked very young for my age in those days. I was 18, 19, and I looked about 14 or 15. I was, what do you say, late developer or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, this priest came along and he began to attack me. And there was, again, when your self-victims talk about being unable to talk about what happened to them, there was no one to turn to, And you had to suffer it and suck it up and stuff it down and try and cope and get on with it, which I did then. And then it stopped after, maybe it went on for about 3 years, and then it stopped. And then I got on with I was ordained eventually then. And then I was living with this childhood trauma and then this later trauma as a young adult. And it began to grind me down very badly with depression and post-traumatic stress. You would know about, obviously. And I was really suffering from post-traumatic stress since childhood, And so it was a bit of a battle to get through life and get through from day to day. And I suppose then the toll it took upon me ended up in a kind of a breakdown in 2002 around Christmas. And I remember at that time I was a young, still relatively young priest, and I was a curate in a parish, and I wrote a letter I was writing letters and writing articles about the church and abuse and its poor response and bad response to victims, lack of compassion for victims, not having identified myself as a victim yet, but being a victim and knowing what it was like. So I remember writing a cardinal law in Boston had just resigned. It was the 13th of December, 2002. And I remember saying to myself, right, he's resigned. Now they should all go. Anyone who is like him, who's covered up, should get out. And I wrote an article, really, I suppose it was, for the Irish News, our local paper here in the north, the local newspaper. And so they published it, or they were going to publish it, and they rang me. This was a Friday, and they rang me on the Sunday, and Cardinal Connell was in trouble in Dublin. And Mary Collins was calling for his resignation over his mishandling and all that. So they rang me on the Sunday evening, which would have been the 15th of December. And they asked me, we're going to publish your piece in full tomorrow, but I just want to ask you a question. Do you think Cardinal Connell should resign? And I, without hesitation, said, yes, he should. He should resign. And that was all hell broke loose the next morning, about 6 o'clock in the morning. My phone started ringing. It was the BBC News, it was RTE News and all of this. And I was in a bad way at that time, suffering with all of this, And I suppose then that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I got through Christmas, and then in early January, my doctor, I went to the doctor, and he says, "You're exhausted. I'm putting you off sick." And basically, I suppose I had had a breakdown, and then I knew I needed to get help with all of this stuff. And I began then to seek out someone who would help me. And I was put in touch with a therapist in Massachusetts. And I got in touch with him, and he agreed that he would work with me, and that, I told him the whole story. I'm giving you a very potted history here. But I was permitted, I had to get permission from the bishop, or at that time, not our current bishop, but the previous one, I had informed of my abuse by a priest, and who had done nothing, and I had been lied to by my own diocese about this man, and that they had other stuff on him that I didn't know about. It all came out later, of course, but I had reported my own abuse because I was worried about another young person that I saw this man with one day, and I panicked, and I immediately reported what had happened to me, fearing that it was going to happen also to this young man, Anyway, I was lied to left, right, and center, and I was given the runaround. But finally, I went to America for 6.5 months. I lived and worked in a parish, and I worked with this marvelous therapist. He was absolutely marvelous. He was like a friend, and he was so good, and so no one ever before had helped me with any of this or comforted me with any of this, And it was an amazing experience. But then I came back home at the end of it all. This was the end of September 2003, and the abuser was still in position. He hadn't been called aside or stepped aside. And then the bishop at the time, not our current bishop, but the one previous, sent for me to talk, and he explained to me, and he read a letter to me that a solicitor had written. Not that I knew it was a solicitor by the legal speak in it. And basically, it was my word against this priest's, and that he believed me, but he also had to believe him, which made no sense to me whatsoever. Anyway, that rumbled on until about 2004.
That's an oxymoron. I believe you, but I also have to believe him.
Yeah, it's craziness, But anyway, I got legal advice in 2004 in the month of March. And then I communicated to the previous bishop that I had got legal advice, and this is what the advice was, that I had grounds for criminal proceedings against this priest. James Donaghy is his name, it's in the public domain, and I could take civil proceedings against the bishop.
You're a priest.
No, I'm getting there. No, I'll get to that point. He's out of the priesthood, and he got jailed, But anyway, within a week of communicating that advice, this priest, Jim Donaghy, was stepped down from ministry on account not of my allegations, but other allegations that they had against him, which they had obviously sat upon for years. They knew my concerns, and they didn't put two and two together and say, we've got a problem here, until I forced their hand, in a sense. Well, that rumbled on again up until 2009. That's about 5 years this went on. He was put out of ministry. He wasn't ministering, and he hadn't been ministering. And he was working in the local airport here as a baggage handler, of all things. So the police contacted me in December 2009, and they said, we have reason to believe that you are a victim of this man. And you see, I had been told, this was one of the lies, that the diocese had reported my abuse to the police. But the police said they had no record of ever being told about it, But they had heard from another source that I may have been affected by James Donaghy, because the young man that I was worried about had come and made a complaint in December 2009 to the police. So then when the police rang me, I says, yes, I was a victim. And I told them the whole story. I was on the phone for about 2.5 hours that night with the detective. And then the next thing was that I made a statement later in that month of December, when I came home to the north for Christmas. I was based in Dublin at the time, in Rathmines Parish, and I was doing further studies and whatever. So I came home for Christmas, and I made a statement, official. And then James Donaghy was arrested at the end of January. He was working in India at this time. And the young man that I was worried about had gone to the police, and then he come home on business to do some business here, and the police arrested him at the international airport, and they charged him with crimes against me against this other young person and another person, the 3 victims. And then this rumbled on for a year, the legal proceedings. And finally, well, in the following January, the trial started, and it was January 2011. And this was the last week of January, and we were waiting on tenterhooks, obviously very psyched up psychologically, knowing the ordeal that we were going to have to face. And I got a phone call after the end of the week of the first week of the trial that the trial had collapsed because the judge sitting on the case was a close personal friend of the bishop here at the time. And she had sat for a whole week hearing and knowing, having read the evidence and seeing this bishop's name everywhere in the evidence. And she sat for a whole week until she was confronted by the chief prosecutor, who asked her about her friendship with our bishop. And she denied, this has nothing to do with me sitting on this case. And then her hand was forced and she had to recuse herself. So then we were left hanging for 10 months until the middle of November 2011. And then we got there, another judge was found who was not prejudiced, and he took the case, and we were called then. It lasted from the middle of November to the middle of December. And it was a brutal ordeal of having to give evidence against this man, 3 days giving evidence, talking about stuff that I had never talked about except to a therapist, and going into the details and being cross-examined on the details of what he had done, and it was terrible. Well, the result was that in the middle of December, he was found guilty for all the abuse that we had suffered and the other 2 had suffered. And he was remanded in jail. And in the middle of February 2012, he got 10 years in jail. And but he's out now, of course. I mean, he only do 5 years up here in the north. You know, it doesn't matter to me that he's out, you know. The fact is that justice was served, you know.
The vindication. It's back to vindication. And that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Jeez, Father, that is just, you know, I mean, all the time I'm listening to you there and thinking, you know, you hear people all the time talking about the crimes of within the church and the people that have committed such similar atrocities to others. And, and you hear them saying, oh, you know, the church, they're all pedophiles and they're all blah blah blah. And as a Catholic, you're there thinking, well, not every priest that joins the priesthood is a paedophile, and not everybody is drawn to those sort of actions. Some are actually victims, and given all of that, and you hear people saying, "Oh, that's why I'd never go, and that's why I left the church, and I'm no longer a part of the church." But in all of that, it has never seemed to have affected your belief in the church and its teachings. You seem to be able to separate the church's teachings from the actions of some members. And a great member of the church, you have to...
Well, I had known very good priests, thankfully. The priests in my early childhood were very good men who inspired me, and I wanted to be like them. I mean, one particular parish priest, I mean, I was devoted to him, and I thought he was a great man, and he was a great man, God rest him. And I wanted to be a priest like him. And I felt very strongly called to the priesthood since very early days. And then this other man came along. I was a bit older, and it was actually much worse for the fact that I was older, you know, and felt so helpless and being overpowered and all that. And but I was determined to be a good priest as best as I could be. I mean, we're all imperfect and flawed, but so I knew God. I mean, that's the most important thing. I knew that God had nothing to do with this, and I loved God. You see, already.
Did you ever question? Sorry for interrupting. Why God allowed it to happen? Did you ever say, "I've lost my faith in God because how could God allow this to happen?" Which is what a lot of people...
and I can understand that fully.
People who are trying to dig holes at the Catholic Church would say, well, why would God allow Father McCafferty, a young priest or a young student priest, to be, you know, and why would you be so devoted to a church and to a God that would allow that or stand by and allow. But he didn't. In your sense, you say
No,
he didn't allow it to happen because he gave
no.
you the strength to
Yeah,
find a way
I
to.
wouldn't have survived without faith. I wouldn't have. It would have been a case of and hope. You see, this is the thing. You mentioned hope earlier. I had hope. I've always had hope, even when I didn't see any answer, when I felt that it's never going to be better. This is never going to get better. I'm always going to be suffering this depression, and there's no. But in the middle of it, you cling on because you know God. You know who God is. You love God, and even when you can't experience Him, you believe that He's there. And there's no. I mean, there's the question of innocent suffering. Why is it permitted? We don't have easy answers to that. No one has a good answer to that. I don't think. It comes down to hope, and it comes down to faith and love, and that's what kept me going. That's what I believed that I would get through it somehow. I didn't know how, but it's the psalm about where I walk in the valley. The valley of the shadow of death, and I will fear no evil. You don't know you're in the valley, you're in a dark place, and you don't see the light, but you trust and you hope that you will find the way out. I trusted even when I said I am sorely afflicted with the psalm and all of that, so that was the way. And I knew God, and I knew good priests and good religious, and I knew the value of faith, and I knew that faith had given me strength, and that. So that's why I didn't blame God. I never blamed God. It was Jim Donaghy. It was Jim Donaghy to blame solely. He chose to do what he chose to do what he did. God didn't tell him to do it, and God didn't want him to do it either. It was not the will of God. We go against the will of God. There's evil consequences for that. That's evil is the absence of the good. And when you let go of the good, you open up to evil. Then.
Why did that psalm evoke such emotion in you, Father?
Well, because I'm still, I suppose, not too bad. I mean, I saw myself much worse than this, but I suppose I'll always be raw. I mean, I'm not better than I was after the trial of that man. After he was sentenced, I took another breakdown, a very bad, worst one ever. And even though the trial was over and he'd been found guilty, it was no consolation. I mean, but I suppose you'll always be raw and wounded, and sometimes something will just flare up, And that psalm is the most beautiful psalm. Of course, it's such a loving and good psalm of the shepherd, the good shepherd looking after us, and even when we're in darkness and afraid, that he's right there, and believing that, and that's how I got through. That's how I hope.
Did you ever doubt
The
your faith?
virtue of hope.
Did you ever doubt your faith through all of this, or did it make you stronger?
I mean, I'm not. I didn't. It's not as if there were times when I felt I was being crushed. Even at Mass. There was one particular day I remember, a Sunday Mass, and I was coming up to the communion, or we'd finished the consecration. We're coming up towards, and I couldn't breathe. And I felt as if I was being crushed under the weight of something, and I had to sit down, and I could barely speak, and a nurse had to come up, and I couldn't even give out Holy Communion. I was so weakened. But I haven't said that. It was the Mass that got me through. Every day as a priest, I've celebrated Mass every single day, even on the worst days, even on the days when I was in the deepest darkness and I didn't see the way out. But it was as if the Mass held me up because of what the Mass is. What the Mass is the sacrifice of Christ by which he overcomes death and he destroys death, and he comes down into the valley of the shadow of death and is present in it, and he fills it with his light. And it's the resurrection also lifting us up in the Mass, So, but I mean, having said that, I mean, I never blamed God, or I was never angry with God. No, I never was. I mean, I sometimes was afraid that I was abandoned, and that I wasn't going to get through or survive. But I did. I'm here. Here I am. And it did make me stronger. Yes, it did. I suppose it did. It did.
Do you find that the COVID lockdown has kind of allowed for all these, I suppose, memories to come back? You haven't got the regimentation, if you like, of daily communion, daily mass, daily Sunday mass. So when you haven't got the mass and the consecration of the mass to do every day, or to do at least on a Sunday, you have too much time in your hands, and as they say, idle hands is the devil's work.
Are you? Do you mean generally or me personally?
You personally. Do you
well,
find
no, because we had mass every day. I celebrated mass every day, even in an empty church. And we have a webcam. You see, our church has a webcam, and we broadcast the mass every day. So lockdown or no lockdown, I celebrated mass in the church. I mean, Easter last year, the Easter liturgy, the Triduum, I celebrated on my own in an empty church and didn't leave anything out. We did everything. And so, no, I mean, but I suppose what lockdown maybe has done is make you more acutely aware. I mean, and we've had a number of very difficult situations in our parish here, which are very emotional and make you, your own emotions are involved, and, so you're only human. And, but no, I mean, there was never a day there wasn't mass in our church, even during lockdown. Yeah. There wasn't a day when I didn't celebrate Sunday mass, daily mass, not one day. And more besides, we put on other liturgies as well for people that they could tune in. I mean, we would have a couple of hundred people on our webcam every day.
See, that's the amazing thing. A lot of priests have said to me that they've had more people listening in.
Yes.
Hundreds and thousands of people looking in that you'd never expect inside a church.
No, exactly. That's the truth. Yeah.
It's not a replacement.
No, it's not. No, it definitely isn't. No, and the sooner we get away, we need to get away from that. The webcam is we got our webcam installed for our sick people, that they could participate from home in the bed or wherever they were, and also for the fact that funerals, sometimes people can't get home from America or wherever, that they can join in that way. But the webcam is not the ideal. And it never will be, and it never must be. Physical presence is required for the sacraments. You can't hear confession over the phone. Physical presence is required for all of the sacraments. You can't baptize over the phone. You certainly can't give Holy Communion over the phone. You must be physically present, and it's about physical presence. It's the presence of God, and God drawing us into his presence. So no, the webcam is there. It's been useful, but it's not in any shape or form to be seen as better or whatever, more desirable than being physically in the church. We need to be physically there.
Father, I could talk to you for absolute forever. I mean, honest to God, we've only scratched the surface of Father Paddy McCafferty. I mean, we could talk about your views on priests marrying. We could talk about so many, how you think that the Catholic Church should deal with priests who abused. Should they be completely excommunicated? Should they be treated?
They can never minister again, never, under any circumstances. They must be dismissed from the clerical state. If they've abused a child or a young person, they have to be gone. They're not, as Pope Benedict said when he wrote to the church in Ireland, back whenever it was, but maybe 10 years ago, they should not despair of the mercy of God. No one is beyond the mercy of God, but they are finished as regards ministry in the church. Finished. Never can you allow or take the chance there's no reintegration with that. That's beyond. Once you break that, it's broken. It can never be fixed. You must make your peace with God as best you can, and try and live a life of penance even, but you never allow those back into ministry, never.
Why do you think that they are being allowed to continue, or being in many cases moved on to different parishes, or moved on to?
Well, I certainly hope that's not happening now. That's not allowed to happen now. If there's an allegation now, you step aside immediately, and it's investigated, and that all takes time. But the days when there were days when obviously they were moved around and they were covered up for. But I would certainly, I'd be, from this diocese's point of view, and most dioceses that I know all over the world for that matter, that's no longer possible, because it's taken so seriously. In fact, the Catholic Church is probably the safest place now for children and young people and the vulnerable, because of the strict protocols and procedures. They're very strict now, you know, and thank God they need to be, and to safeguarding, what we talk about, safeguarding, you know, which is a priority in every parish and every diocese. We have strict protocols in our church here as regards, you know, being with people, and, you know, not being on your own with a child, all of that sort of thing. And it covers everyone from me to the people who clean the church or read in the church or give out Holy Communion, whatever, you know. So I would say that it's not possible nowadays, the scenario that you had to, where somebody can be kept in ministry or moved or whatever. That day is long gone. That day is long gone. Yeah.
Thank God. And where to now for Father McCafferty? You're back at normality.
Relatively, we're still obviously have to be careful with this virus. It's not gone away.
Isn't it funny that down here we're in such strict lockdown, and you can have people in Newry, in Warren County, Newry.
It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up, you know. But please God, life will soon return to some, or what we know as normality soon, you know. And it's been an awful few years for everyone, a year or even more than a year now. And they say, I remember hearing somewhere, or I forget who actually said it, that it takes a pandemic about 4 years to run its course. But, you know, we're through, hopefully through the worst of it, you know, hopefully. And while it will still be there, and we still have to be careful, and wearing masks and sanitizing will probably be a feature of life, you know, for some time to come. And maybe, I mean, it works. I normally catch something in the winter, like a flu or something, and this year, nothing. Thank God, nothing. And it's because of sanitizing and distance and masks, you know, so these things work. So we have to be sensible, and we're obliged. The fifth commandment calls us to take care of each other as well as not kill each other. You know, it's not just thou shalt not kill, it's also we take care of each other and look after each other. And we're obliged to do that, especially the vulnerable, you know.
Well, Father Paddy McCafferty, it's a great name. It really is. It's been an absolute joy, and I will no doubt be contacting you to come on again and expand even more on your fabulous views.
There's much to discuss, as they say.
I never thought it was going to go in the direction it went, but it was just profound and emotional, and and I thank you for being so honest, and and you know, and I hope that you will in some way be able to come to terms with what happened, and
pray for our families
survivor,
here.
Not a victim.
Pray for our families here on Tuesday, that they will have justice and truth after 50 years. Pray for the families here. Yeah.
Will indeed. Thank you, Father.
God bless.
That's the end of the show for today. Until the next time. Lacún of day, Bawalum to Galer Chacana, Sonus Agus Gra. I wish you peace, happiness, and love. Agus Gadeshit Slán.
God bless, Mary. Thank you. Bye. God bless.